elderly apartment housing, one very badly stocked supermarket, and then to the bottom of the slide, bar housing that is actually one of the first housing projects ever built in this country, two to three story brick, pretty stable working class group. And then right next to it, these maisonettes done for basically middle to lower income people by developers that have a lifespan of about 25 years, more or less. And then to the left, more parking space, and at the lower left corner, a school building, rather attractive, very solid school building that has been empty for a great many years and is scheduled for remodeling and redevelopment. Okay? The site was made of 2 blocks with a minor vehicular street going through them. Okay, in this project, there are several things going on at the same time in terms of typological modification. First, there is that group of detached units, which then begin to be grouped so as to form what sometimes could be interpreted as a perimeter block condition and sometimes could be interpreted as a bar, sort of modern superblock type of housing, in terms of its orientation. The most dense part of the project includes the rental units of more conventional design, and the looser, less dense part of the project include the houses, quote unquote, of the project. Although in some way the housing seems to be oriented in a certain direction in terms of its massing, the design of the circulation creates a very strong system of penetration in exactly the opposite direction that the housing is going to, so as to better emphasize this spatial matrix quality of urban and natural space where there is a great deal of weaving between the two. All the services were included in those smaller buildings on the upper part of the axonometric, close to the little theater in the round, which was also a sort of celebration of communal space of one sort or another. And the first bar being the offices, and then having smaller professional offices, community activities, a childcare center, and that restaurant type facility that I was describing before, communal kitchen in some cases. That is the ground floor plan. Well, yeah. That sort of shows the interlocking of the and transformation of this basic unit. And that is the basic unit itself. Basically organized about a central space with a differentiated circulation perimeter on it, connected then to various kinds of rooms that are left to a certain extent undesignated. And this was also a rather important realization in the design of this housing, which is that, of course, largely due to the influence of the minimum existence minimum standards, which were then legislated into minimum housing standards, most rooms are dimensioned and proportioned to accommodate a specific pieces of furniture in specific relationships between themselves. That is, in most rooms, you cannot literally, with the available furniture, create a situation where you could have entertaining, working, and rest all integrated in one space. So that one of the constraints of the project was to design the rooms and to proportion and size them in ways that would allow for a great variety of uses, and where one indeed could, in the same room, have the possibility of bringing a friend, sleeping and doing one's work. In that respect, one could say that these rooms were totally non-functional. or afunctional rather than non-functional, in that obviously the activities were very important to us, but the notion was that the activities could be ultimately determined and selected by the preferences of the occupants themselves, providing that you gave them a room that they could do something with, as opposed to very little with. And then the diagram at the bottom shows where those are placed in the general site plan. Okay. Those are some elevations of that project, which shows that sometimes the entry porch was integrated into sort of continuous gallery space facing the street. And some of the conventionally designed unit types and their location in the site plan itself. These were more thought of, not some in terms of literally 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom apartments, the way we usually think of those units. This project takes exactly the opposite strategy. Instead of thinking in terms of the individual identified detached house object, the idea is to resort to a known and, in my opinion, rather sound and safe existing building type, which is the townhouse, which is obviously an attached housing condition. And the diagrams show various aspects of circulation and density and so on and so forth. Figure ground at the top. I guess that in the axonometric, I think that there is a bigger image of that. Okay, here we go. Is that focused? No, okay. But I can't focus it from here either. So if someone could possibly focus these slides, I will appreciate it. The townhouses are located in bars along the minor streets and are further modified to become sort of like minor superblock conditions at the end of the site. And then there is a sort of very simple wall-like building facing the more public aspect of the site, which contains all the retail and the office rental spaces. This wall sort of breaks at the point where the site faces the Everson Museum to make place for what constitutes basically a muse, leading to the health facility and child care facility at the end of that space. The townhouses then form between themselves these rather large collective yard spaces, which is really the place where you enter the house if you're on foot. If you are driving, you come with your car, you go straight into your garage. In the case of the townhouses at the bottom, you do have individual garages. In the case of the townhouses facing the minor vehicular street, you go into a collective parking situation underneath the building itself. And then you go, like in most American houses, straight into the sort of den and cooking areas and so on. Very important. Another restriction of the project was that in spite of the fact that the building code allows for kitchens to be internal spaces, that was specifically prohibited in this design, in that kitchens designed as internal spaces are clearly second-rate, lousy spaces. And of course, it's very difficult to get anyone in their right mind to come and do work in that space. So that automatically second-rate spaces produce, second-rate workers, mostly women. So one great way of ensuring that your lover, husband, friend will help maintain the house is to first, thing is to make the kitchen into a beautiful space that has lots of light and elbow room and so on, and also that is designed in such a way that it completely subverts the rule of the magic triangle that places the stove, the sink, and the refrigerator at equidistant points, because that whole ideology is based on the assumption that there is a single worker doing that. And when two people try to work together in a kitchen that is designed on the basis of the perfect triangle, they get on each other's way 100% of the time. It's absolutely horrible. So in any event, So, then if you come from food, you go into the garden space and then into the townhouse itself. In this project, there was a provision in that gridded garden at the top of the slide for productive gardens. That is, each one of those squares, there is one per house in the project. The rental housing were the super blocks at the end, but in any event, those parterres were designated for planting your own tomatoes or your own flowers or whatever you wanted to do with them. Those are some views of various aspects of the project, little vignettes. Ground floor plan. I don't know. Wait a minute. Well, I missed something. I don't know. In any event, one was the ground floor plan, one was taken at a higher level. These are some of the townhouse types. The townhouse is such an incredibly flexible type. It's almost like a loft condition, that can really be manipulated in many different ways. Some axonometrics. Okay. This project, with this rather peculiar-looking site plan, is based again on a very different assumption of the other two. It basically is defined by these houses, these squarish, buildings placed on a rather organized grid. These houses are actually shared by 4 families. And each one of the houses is sitting on its own plot. It's an elevated, bermed garden that would be designed, kept, maintained, and would obviously be very different from anybody else's by the 4 families who share that particular plot, private garden on which it sits. The elements of the facade were regularized and systematized according to certain standards. But once having done that, the elements are distributed and organized in the facade to denote the particular side of the building in which they are, as well as the particular position of the house within the complete grid arrangement, so that with very few standardized modular elements, you can achieve a great deal of variety in the overall reading of the situation. I don't know if you can begin to see that. Well, in any event, each one of the plots begins to organize another kind of urban, quasi-urban space of the small square, and then obviously those 4 buildings will begin to read as belonging to that particular square, although the moment that you're past that, the next 4 buildings could read as belonging to that particular intersection of streets, so that a variety of readings is achieved within the project. Again, there is a bar-type building facing the more public side, containing the office rental space. Commercial is retail spaces are put in 2 rather simple buildings, arcaded buildings in the minor vehicular street. The rental housing is along the other edge, and then on the other side there is a housing mix with a health facility. What is perhaps very different about this project in relation to the other 2 is that it makes a very different use of the site. It puts all the housing on one of the blocks, and then on the other block, it concentrates all the shared collective facilities. One of the little buildings with the round trees on top is the childcare facility, and the other one is this kitchen restaurant type facility, the collective dining rooms, whatever. So that around the studio, this project became known as the suburb and the countryside and the country club, side, implying that, you lived in your own community and then across the street you went to this place where you had all these other kinds of facilities, the pools, the kids, and all the rest of it. And that is, again, a site plan which hopefully begins to communicate the richness of the reading of this spatial matrix across the different parts. You will also begin to see that the units and the houses themselves have a peculiar kind of organization depending on their particular location. And in this project, although each family occupies 1/4 of the building, each level, the zoning is vertical, and when you go to the next level, you're actually looking out into the different side of the building each time, so that they are organized in a spiral movement condition, so that although you occupy only 1/4, your experience is that of looking out all 4 sides of the building and having all 4 orientations for the building. Something that we felt was an important aspect for psychological identification with the house as such. Those are some of the elevations. And one of the house types. Another one. And the last project was on a site of a more residential character, where there were very few commercial facilities and infrastructure services, closer to the university campus, which is the single largest employer in the city of Syracuse. Here, of course, a few things were adjusted in the program itself, in that obviously the offices would not be rented by small corporations and service agencies as much as by probably professors of the university using it as private working space, or by local architects, or by students of architecture sharing some studio space or whatever, right? It's a slightly different scale project. There are many, this site was also vacant. The only building on the site was that Victorian house and its carriage house, which was kept on the upper right of the project. In this case, the type being modified is what I guess could be basically called a perimeter block condition. In discussing the notion of the house versus the housing, is also a site that has a phenomenal slope from one end of the site to the other. Very difficult, tricky situation. But basically, the idea here is to create a base which has all the rental housing, and this base can be acceded in different ways. For example, if your apartment happens to be on the ground floor, like it happens mostly along the left side of, and of course the opposite side, you'll simply go in from the street. But if you get close to the point where the base begins to have 3 and 4 stories, then you use one of the 4 circulation towers at each corner of the project. Then on top of this base, there are these quote-unquote penthouses. And these penthouses, which are only penthouses in that they happen to be in the uppermost level of the project, have certain characteristics where the notion of front porch, gable, attic were redefined as in a regular house. The perimeter block describes an internal space, which is the grand collective backyard for everyone living there, with the only difference that people living in the houses would have these little stair towers, prefabricated little spiral staircases that are shared by 2 of the houses, and you can walk right down into the yard from that point. Whereas people living in the rental apartments would, obviously have to go towards the circulation system that allows you direct access into the garden. This collective backyard space is a space rather like a large-scale beguinage, and in this beguinage, another system is introduced which is on the upper part, and I suppose that now we can go to, well, I don't know. On the larger block is the health facility, and then in the old Victorian house, the child care center, because the point was being made symbolically that the children are, of course, the continuity with the past, between past and future. And then on the smaller lot, this restaurant, meal, collective dining rooms, type facility, with the small shops along the minor vehicular street with the offices on top, forming or describing a rather urban piazza space connecting both things. And these two facilities are separated from the backyard by a path at a different level that is flanked by trees. And we imagine that this would be the place where the joggers would just run around all the time. Obviously, although the houses tend to emphasize the individual characteristic of itself, the circulation columns in the interior of the beguinage begin to create a larger formal order that begins to have a much more collective character than the outside of the project. So that is individualistic towards the outside, collective towards the inside. That is ground floor plan. And that is the plan where the penthouses are, which are accessible through a sort of street under a gallery space, which is the reinterpretation of the front porch. And this street can be reached from the 4 circulation points. There is, of course, parking on this side of the site, where you see the curve of the curb, leading into it. Some of the elevations. And then the house itself, which I'm going to show in more detail. The ground floor with its front porch modified into a covered gallery that joins all the houses. Then a little bit of residual yard as a distancing element between the more public street or the street shared by everyone who has a house there, obviously, and the house itself. Then you come into a lobby space with a window where you can put your groceries straight into the kitchen. To the right and to the left, a secondary circulation space to the upper level. And there you have the coat closet and the powder room. And then you come into basically what is a undesignated functional space that is only designated in terms of its architectural qualities. So that, I don't know, you could have the dining room at the top, or maybe in the middle, or maybe on the other side. One place could be the family room, the other one could be the TV room, whatever. And then, of course, there is the little stairs shared by the 2 houses leading back to the down to the backyard. In the upper level, you get 3 rooms, 2 rectangular rooms in the back, which are basically about the same size. One has a slightly different condition, which is where it touches the next house, and then you have these little lateral windows in there as well as the other ones, and there is a balcony for all of them. And then you have a room in the front, right above the gallery, which there again could be someone's office if one of the members of the couple happens to be working at home, and that could be reached directly from the secondary circulation system without getting the clients or the colleagues involved with the life of the house. Or they could be somebody's den or bedroom or whatever. And then in the upper, this plan is flipped, I'm sorry, but at the top you see this attic-like space, which is totally undifferentiated space, which could be made there again into storage or somebody's family room or office or bedroom or whatever. and the height would allow for the building of lofts in it, and etc. And the upper plan is just the terrace itself, showing the skylight piece over the loft, the open loft, which becomes the residual gable of the house, and also could become, although in Syracuse it would make no sense whatsoever, the place where you would put your solar collectors if you wanted to have solar energy active systems within this the project itself. And that is at the end of the presentation. You should regard this in a sense as a presentation of work in progress. So I thank you very much. Excuse me. Just for the sake of fairness, I would like very much to mention to you the names of the students who worked on this. I feel that I don't want to leave them out. The first project was done by Tom Vail, the second one by Jeffrey Hill, the third one by William McDonald, and the last one that you saw by Raymond Biller, who are now happily hired by big firms in New York City. Thank you.